Hello everyone. Today we'll be looking at the development and eruption of the human dentition, and specifically we will be looking at the primary or the deciduous dentition, uh, how the deciduous dentition actually erupts into the place, and what are the rationale behind eruption and calcification of the human dentition. So, what is the importance of learning about the eruption patterns of the primary dentition? So first of all, by knowing what is normal, we can actually differentiate it from the abnormal. As we know that there are a lot of morphological variations, it means there are a lot of variations in the eruption patterns in the size and morphology of the teeth. So if we know the normal, then we can actually differentiate between what is normal and what is not. And then there are some anomalies regarding the eruption patterns of the primary dentition. So this is one thing for which we need to know about the primary dentition. Another thing that is of importance is an anthropology. It is science of how the human population uh, uh, has gone through evolution and development. So it actually tells us the different dentitions. They actually tell us what kind of racial significance, and even in which conditions the people were living in, and what exactly were they died. So another thing is clinical practice. So from the primary dentition can actually help us in clinical practice by telling us the dental age or the chronological age of the patient. So from the teeth that have erupted. Besides, some teeth get impacted during eruption, and this also helps in finding out which teeth need surgeries. So another aspect is uh, the comparative anatomy of human dentition when we compare it with other primates, such as the monkeys and chimpanzees and other mammals as well. So this is known as paleontology and comparative anatomy. So the eruption patterns actually help us in understanding the teeth of other primates and mammals. Another clinical importance of eruption patterns is forensics. And by forensic, I mean forensic odontology or forensic dentistry. And in forensic dentistry, it is identification of the person for which it is used. And the second thing is identification of the age or age estimation through the eruption patterns is done in forensic odontology. So, and this is achieved, all of these different branches of science, they deal with calcification and eruption and emergence of these teeth. So if you know about them, then we can definitely uh, affect our clinical practice. So lastly, it is paleontology that we have talked about. It's a comparative anatomy between the human dentition and the primates and the mammals. So what exactly is needed in order to study all of these sciences? So the number of teeth, the shape of teeth, their size, their position, and their angulation. All of these are considered whenever uh, age estimation, for instance, is considered, or whenever we are comparing human teeth with other mammals or primates. So, so our next section is about the chronology of the primary teeth. But chronology means which teeth calcify first and which teeth they erupt into the oral cavity and their relative sequence. And for this purpose, we have three terminologies that will be introduced. And then these terminologies are calcification, eruption, and emergence. So let's talk about these definitions in detail. So what exactly is chronology? So chronology means understanding the timetable. The timetable are the sequence of eruption or how the teeth erupt into the oral cavity and when do they erupt into the oral cavity. So this is known as chronology. So the next terminology is calcification. So calcification is a process by which the tissues of the developing teeth, they become hardened by the deposition of calcium salts. So another uh, term that is used along with calcification is mineralization. So essentially, the difference between mineralization and calcification is that in calcification is only talking about deposition of calcium salts, whereas mineralization actually talks about deposition of hydroxyapatite. Now hydroxyapatite usually has calcium, phosphate and hydroxyl ions. So by mineralization we mean the deposition of calcium, phosphate and hydroxyl ions in the form of hydroxyapatite and not just calcium. So in terms of oral biology, mineralization is a better term to use than just simply calcification. So then next two terms are eruption and emergence. So what exactly is eruption? Eruption is the continuous movement of the tooth as it develops in the alveolar bone from its cap stage, bud stage, uh, until it reaches the occlusal contact. So eruption is a lifelong phenomenon. It occurs continuously. Why? Because our teeth, they undergo wear and tear, and there are post-eruptive movements. Even when the tooth has emerged into the oral cavity, it still reaches the occlusal plane, and even if it has reached the occlusal plane and it is in occlusal contact with its adjacent teeth, uh, so what happens is it actually grinds away from the food that we eat and other parafunctional habits. So the wear and tear of teeth is considered to be natural, and to accommodate this wear and tear, the tooth actually moves upward into the oral cavity, and this is known as post-eruptive tooth movement. So eruption is takes place throughout life, and that is why it is known as a lifelong phenomenon. While emergence, it only denotes the stage of tooth development as it emerges through the gingiva. So as it comes out from the gingiva, this is known as emergence. So although these terminologies are used interchangeably, but they actually show us that they are two different phenomena that we are dealing with. So now we'll talk about a little bit of sequence of development. So the tooth follicle in which the tooth actually forms, it has different centers of calcification that develops within it. So these centers of calcification are known as lobes, and what happens is that the positive anatomy, which is usually the cusp tips or the incisal edges or the marginal ridges, they usually develop first from the lobes and centers of calcification, and once these centers of calcification they join together or coalesce, then what happens is then the negative anatomy starts to appear. So what happens is whenever tooth is forming, the positive anatomy it forms first, and once the centers of calcification have formed, then they join together. So they are separately formed. For instance, if there are 4 cusps in tooth, so these cusps are developed separately, and then they later on they join together. Then we have the negative anatomy. Uh, the negative anatomy constitutes anything which is below the surface of the tooth. These are fossae and grooves, and they develop as the centers of calcification merge upon one another. The roots, they usually develop last, and the last part of the tooth is the apex. So now the thing is, how much of a tooth needs to be developed in order to erupt or emerge into the oral cavity? Usually the whole of the crown and 2/3 of the root is needed in order for eruption or emergence to take place. And the rest of the tooth are the apical. 1/3 of the root then forms once the tooth has erupted into the oral cavity. So here again, these red arrows, they actually show us that these are in the x-rays. If you just look at it, these are follicles, and these follicles have developing tooth germs inside. And as you can see here, the crown of the molar here is being formed, and up to the cemento-enamel junction. And this is how it actually happens. That the tooth calcification initially occurs at the incisal edges of the anterior teeth and the cusp tips of posterior teeth, and from there on it actually goes downwards in an apical direction, and the last part that actually forms is the apical 1/3 of the root, and it calcifies or mineralizes the last. So the histological stages of tooth development, we actually in x-rays or in dental OPGs, we usually see the calcification of the tooth germs when it has reached the bud stage, and from the bud stage to early bell stage are the stages in which we can actually see the tooth germ. And And during the birth stage as well as the early bell stage, what happens is calcification takes place during the it starts from the incisal edges of the incisor teeth, and then it goes on to the downwards. So lastly, we'll be just looking at the sequence of development uh, and some calcification schedules regarding primary teeth. Now, there's a concept regarding the sequence of eruption and the calcification dates. Although calcification eruption patterns are highly variable, and there can be a lot of variation in terms of eruption or emergence of primary teeth, but calcification stages they usually follow a schedule, and this schedule is that around 30 to 16 weeks in utero, that is during pregnancy or when the embryo is there, the calcification usually starts or initiates. So the calcification of all the primary teeth initiates between 13 to 16 weeks in utero. Now, the sequence of calcification of primary teeth starts from the central incisor, then the first molar, and after the first molar has calcified, then the lateral incisor, followed by the canine and the second molar. Now, the eruption patterns are actually quite different from the sequence of calcification. The central incisor erupts first, then the lateral incisor, then the first molar, then the canine, and then the second molar. So there is a difference in the sequence of eruption and the sequence of calcification. But the thing to understand is that the calcification stages, they usually are very rigid and they remain the same, while there's a lot of variation in terms of eruption and emergence. So by at 18 to 20 weeks in utero, all of the primary teeth have initiated calcification, and they are at different stages of calcification. For instance, in one tooth there is cap stage or bell stage, and others it has just started to form. So although they may be at different stages of mineralization, but all the primary teeth, they have initiated calcification by 18 to 20 weeks in utero. So